Bright conference rooms went dark one by one, elevator chimes stopped, and the only people left were cleaners, security, and the kind of executives who had run out of lies for the day. The company was called Vale Axis. 6 years earlier people in the city used to talk about it like it was the future. Government tools, enterprise defense systems, infrastructure software, all the serious invisible stuff that made other companies look smarter than they were. Now people only talked in lowered voices. Delayed contracts. Missed targets. Another client gone. Another rumor about emergency financing. Another board meeting that ended with half the leadership walking out like they were carrying a body nobody wanted to claim. I pushed a mop past all of it and kept my head down. That was my job. Officially, I cleaned executive floors from 7 at night until 3 in the morning. Unofficially, I listened. Not on purpose at first. You just hear things when people stop seeing you as a person. They would stand 5 feet from my cart talking about runway, liabilities, restructuring, headcount cuts. One vice president cried in a restroom on 28 because her stock options were probably gone. 2 men from legal argued near the elevator about what could still be disclosed to investors. Nobody cared that I was replacing the liner in the trash can between them. A long time ago, I had been the wrong man to ignore. I used to work in systems. Network security, logs, permissions, breach review, ugly back-end problems that only mattered when nobody else could sleep. I was good at it too. Not flashy good. Reliable good. The kind that got called at 2 in the morning because something felt off and I could usually tell why within 20 minutes. Then my marriage cracked open, money got tight, my head went bad in ways I didn't know how to explain, and one bad year rolled into the next. Work dried up. Confidence went with it. Taking a night cleaning job was supposed to be temporary. That had been 3 years earlier. Her office was on 31. I knew who she was before I ever heard her voice. Gillian Sterling. Founder. Chief Executive. The woman whose photo still hung in the lobby from better years, back when magazines called her relentless like it was a compliment. In person she looked less polished than the articles. Tired eyes. Fast walk. Always carrying too much herself even when other people were around to carry it for her. Lately she had started staying late. Not once or twice. Regularly. Past 10. Past midnight sometimes. I would see light under her office door while the rest of the floor went black. No dinner brought in, no assistants, no neat little executive routine. Just her, a blazer on the chair, sleeves pushed up, 3 screens on, going line by line through something that clearly wasn't meant for casual reading. That night I was wiping fingerprints off the glass wall outside her office when her phone rang. I heard the sharp scrape of her chair, then her heels crossing the floor fast. She stepped into the hall and kept walking, already answering, voice low and angry. Her main monitor stayed on. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was standing right there with a spray bottle in my hand, and the screen was angled toward the glass. What caught me wasn't the names. It was the shape. Audit logs. Access history. File pulls. A normal executive opens a cluster of documents in a way that makes human sense. Budget, supporting deck, contract draft, maybe a summary note after. This was wrong. Sensitive folders opened in batches after midnight. Pricing models, bid structures, architecture briefs, then archived client revisions in the same session. Not reviewed. Touched. Exported or staged. The sequence was too clean and too hungry. Whoever had done it knew exactly where value lived. And the account doing it had executive clearance. I stared maybe 3 seconds, 4 at most. Long enough for old instincts to wake up so hard it felt physical. My chest got tight. Not panic. Recognition. I set the bottle down on my cart and took out my phone like I was checking the time. One photo would have been stupid. So I didn't take the screen. I took the reflection in the glass wall beside it, faint but readable enough to hold timestamps, folder paths, and the user block in the corner. Then I stepped back and kept moving, slow, steady, like a man finishing his route. By the time she came back, I was already at the far end of the corridor changing a trash liner. On the service elevator down, I looked again. Off-hours extraction. Repeated sessions. Privileged access. High-value files. Too many losses at the company for too long. Veil access wasn't just falling apart. Somebody inside was carving it open. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 11 minutes after shift end, staring at that blurry reflected image like it might change if I waited long enough. Safe life on one side. Old life on the other. I had worked hard to become a man nobody expected anything from. But I knew what I'd seen. And for the first time in years, I also knew I wasn't wrong. The hardest part wasn't figuring out what I had seen. The hardest part was going home and trying to act like I could still live the same way after seeing it. I got back to my apartment a little after 4, kicked off my work shoes by the door, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone face up beside a pile of overdue envelopes I had stopped opening on time. My ex had texted the night before about our son's school trip deposit. I was already late on it. The landlord had sent a reminder 2 days earlier. My whole life worked on a narrow margin now. Quiet job. No attention. No risk. That was the deal I had made with myself. But around 5 in the morning, I opened the reflected photo again. Then I wrote down everything I could remember before sleep erased the sharp edges. Time on the log. Folder names. The order of access. Which monitor it was on. Where she had been standing before the call came in. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. That part came back to me fast, like some section of my brain had been waiting in storage. When I woke up that afternoon, I called the only person from my old life I still trusted not to talk too much. Nolan Clarkson. We had worked together at a managed security firm years earlier. He had gone into digital forensics after that. We weren't close enough for holidays, but close enough that if I asked one narrow question, he'd hear the shape underneath it. He picked up on the third ring. You calling me from jail? Not yet. That sounds promising. I kept it hypothetical. Executive-level account activity. Sensitive files. Repeated off-hours pulls. Access pattern inconsistent with actual workflow. No credentials stolen, at least not visibly. Could that point to staged internal leakage instead of a normal review? The line went quiet for a second. Then Nolan said, if the sequence is clean and repeatable, that's not curiosity. That's transfer behavior. Either the person is the leak, or somebody's using an account with enough familiarity not to look clumsy. I leaned back in the chair. And if you were trying to prove it without tripping every legal wire in the room? Chain of custody. Timestamp comparison. Independent preservation. And don't touch anything you're not authorized to touch. People like that survive by turning process against whoever notices first. That stayed with me all evening. At work the building felt more nervous than usual. Not louder. Worse. Quiet in the way people get when bad news is moving ahead of an announcement. On 29, 2 finance analysts were packing framed photos into tote bags. On 30, somebody from HR walked past with the stiff face people wear when they already know what next week looks like. In one conference room I saw a slide frozen on a screen, strategic options. That phrase can mean anything. It usually means blood. She was there again that night. Not in a power suit with a room full of assistants. Alone. Hair tied back, reading from printed budget sheets and access reports with a yellow marker in her hand. I cleaned the outer corridor, changed the kitchenette bins, and watched reflections without looking like I was watching. Around 1 in the morning, the chief operating officer came out of her office. Richard Dane. He was the kind of man boards loved. Calm voice. Perfect posture. Never visibly rushed. He had that polished way of speaking where every sentence sounded pre-approved by legal. I had seen him 3 times in the past week, always near her office, always leaving with a face so controlled it almost became a tell. He paused when he saw me by the copier alcove. "Late one tonight," he said. I gave him the little half-smile people expected from me. "Seems like everybody is." His eyes dropped to my cart, then came back to my face. "Not rude. Just measuring. Make sure this floor stays clean. We've got visitors tomorrow." Then he walked to the elevator without another word. I waited until the doors closed, then looked through the glass. She was still standing inside her office, but now she wasn't sitting. She had both hands braced on the desk, staring at something on the center monitor with the expression of a person who had just seen a math problem finally become a person. That was when I knew she was following her own line towards somebody. The next day Nolan texted me from an encrypted address he used for contract work. No greeting. Just one sentence. "If this is real, push it through a protected channel before the owner of that account knows anybody noticed." So I did the one thing that made my stomach turn all shift. Vail Access had an external ethics portal linked through its compliance page. Most employees forgot it existed. I hadn't. On my dinner break, from my own phone on cellular, sitting in the loading dock stairwell, I filed a report stripped down to the bones. Repeated off-hours executive file access tied to high-value bid and architecture material. Possible internal leak. Relevant timestamps preserved. Review access logs against recent contract losses and contact with rival firm Helix Nova. I did not sign my name. I attached only what I could safely describe, not the image itself. Enough to point. Not enough to hang myself if the system was already dirty. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Near the end of the shift, I passed the break room and caught 2 engineers talking in low voices. "Board's pushing an emergency vote," one said. "Sail? Or controlled wind down?" I kept walking. Back on 31, Gillian Sterling stepped out of her office just as I reached her door with the cleaning cloth in my hand. For the first time since I'd worked that floor, she looked directly at me, not through me. Like she had finally realized there were still people in the building after midnight. Her gaze held for 1 extra second. Tired, sharp, suspicious. Then she looked past me toward the dark hallway and said, almost to herself, "Interesting." She went back inside and closed the door. I stood there with my cart, pulse climbing for no visible reason, because by then I was almost sure of 2 things. I had just pushed the truth into motion. And she was getting close enough to the same name that neither of us had much time left. By the next Monday, the whole building felt like it was holding its breath. You could see it in small things. People stopped chatting in the elevators. Department heads kept disappearing into side rooms with legal. Security had 2 extra men in the lobby pretending not to watch anybody. Even the screens in the executive hallway looked different, fewer open dashboards, more locked displays, like somebody had suddenly remembered that information had weight. Then my badge stopped opening the 31st floor service door. It worked on 28, 29, 30. Then red light. Denied. I tried once more, slow, like maybe I had hit it wrong. Same result. The overnight security guy, Marco, came over from the desk near the elevator bank. He knew me well enough to look embarrassed before he said anything. "New access map," he muttered. "Came through an hour ago." "From who?" He hesitated. That was answer enough. I nodded like it was nothing, took my cart back to the elevator, and felt the blood drain out of my face. That was the first direct hit. Quiet. Clean. No accusation, no meeting, no paperwork. Just a lockout on the one floor where the leak mattered. Richard Dane had either gotten nervous or gotten confirmation that something was moving. I finished the rest of my route, but I wasn't really cleaning. I was watching. At 12:40 a.m. I saw two men from internal IT go upstairs carrying sealed equipment bags. At 1:10, legal counsel arrived in a coat over her arm and went straight to the executive level. At 1:25, Gillian Sterling came out of the elevator alone, moving fast, phone at her ear, her expression flat in that dangerous way people get when the panic has burned off and only focus is left. At 1:50, Marco slipped me a folded printout without looking at me. Found this on the copier, he said. It was a meeting agenda for the board session scheduled at 8 that morning. Emergency restructuring vote. Asset preservation options. Interim authority transfer. They were going to strip the company while the story was still being written. I went downstairs to the loading bay stairwell and used the number Nolan had sent me the day before for a forensic partner he trusted. I kept it short. Anonymous prior report. Executive lockout change. Possible evidence destruction in progress. Board vote imminent. The woman on the other end asked for one thing only. Do you have contemporaneous notes? Yes. Email them to the protected address I'm texting you. Right now. Original timestamps intact. So I did. My notes, the times, the reflected image, everything I had documented before the walls started moving. Not to the company. Outside it. At 7:30 I was told not to return to the executive floors until further review. By 7:45, I was sitting in my car across from the building, still in my work clothes, watching black sedans pull in for the board meeting. I should have driven away. That would have been the sane move. I had already done more than anyone could expect from a janitor with rent due and a kid depending on him. But I stayed. Because once you know a system is being bent on purpose, there's a point where leaving becomes its own decision. At 8:12 my phone buzzed from an unknown number. Come to lobby reception. Do not speak to anyone but me. No name. Didn't need one. When I got inside, Gillian was waiting near the side corridor outside the main conference suite. No assistant. No smile. Just a dark blouse, tired eyes, and a folder thick enough to matter. You filed the report, she said. Not a question. I looked at her for a second, then nodded. She exhaled once, sharp. Richard moved to isolate my access team at 6 this morning. He told the board I was destabilizing operations and inventing internal sabotage to avoid a controlled sale. You believe he's the one? I believe he never touches the knife directly. Her jaw tightened. Until now. Before I could answer, the conference doors opened. People were taking seats. She looked at me then in a way nobody in that building ever had. Not like cleaning staff. Not like background. Like a witness. Stay close, she said. Inside, the room was already split. Board members on one side, legal near the wall, Dane at the far end of the table calm as ever, one hand resting beside a stack of binders like he had been born in that chair. He didn't even blink when he saw me enter behind her. But something in his face changed by half a degree. Enough. One director started talking immediately about fiduciary duty, cash burn, market confidence. Another said the word transition 3 times in under a minute. Dane framed everything beautifully. Contracts lost because of leadership drift. Internal confusion. The need for decisive stabilization. He almost made it sound kind. Then Gillian stood up and cut through all of it. No vote, she said. Not until emergency preservation orders are entered. The room froze. She laid out her side first. Patterned losses. Bid exposure. Approval routes that made no operational sense. Access overlap centered too often around one office. Then she dropped the second layer. External forensic preservation had already begun based on contemporaneous evidence submitted before this meeting, including off-hours extraction behavior tied to protected internal materials. Dane leaned back slowly. This is reckless. She didn't even look at him. No. Reckless was assuming you'd finish erasing it before I stopped you. That was when legal asked for the devices. Not politely. Formally. Two board members started arguing. One tried to push the vote through anyway. Another demanded a closed session. Dane denied everything, of course. Said she was emotional, cornered, looking for someone to blame. Then he made his mistake. He mentioned a set of logs that, officially, had not yet been described in the room. You could feel it land. Tiny thing. Fatal thing. Every head turned. By the time building security stepped toward him, the meeting was chaos. Not victory. Worse. Real. Phones surrendered. Accounts frozen. Server rooms sealed pending review. The vote suspended. The sale stopped, at least for that day. As I stood near the wall in my janitor badge and work shoes, watching the most powerful man in the company realize the floor had finally moved under him, I understood something simple. Veil Axis wasn't saved. But it had been pulled back from the edge just long enough for the truth to survive. The real damage didn't come out in one dramatic reveal. It came in layers, each one uglier than the last. For 3 days after that board meeting, the company barely functioned. Executive devices were pulled. Outside forensic people took over a sealed conference room on 27. Legal stopped half the leadership from touching shared drives. 2 clients demanded immediate explanations. One trade publication ran a piece saying Veil Axis was in internal free fall. By Thursday, nobody on the upper floors was pretending this was just a restructuring problem anymore. Richard Dane was placed on leave before noon. By Friday, his access history was being compared against the rival firm's bid timing, private calls, and a trail of forwarded materials he had hidden behind ordinary review traffic. He had been careful, which almost made it worse. He rarely moved the most valuable documents in obvious chunks. He broke them apart. Sent context here, pricing logic there, framework language somewhere else, enough for Helix Nova to predict bids, undercut timelines, and walk into client meetings already knowing where Veil Axis was weakest. The whole thing had been designed to look like leadership drift and market erosion. And the board had nearly handed him the body bag. Nobody said that out loud, but everybody knew it. Jillian did not celebrate. That was one of the reasons I started respecting her before any of the rest happened. She moved like somebody trying to stop internal bleeding. First client calls. Then emergency staff briefing. Then outside notices. Then a small war over who was staying, who was going, and which contracts could still be saved if the company admitted the truth fast enough. I got pulled into it quietly. At first it was just statements. Timeline review. Where I had been standing, what I saw, what I recorded, when I documented it, who I contacted. Then more questions. Not because I had suddenly become important, but because I knew how to answer without decorating the facts. By the second week, one of the forensic leads asked what I used to do before cleaning floors. When I told him, he stared at me for a second and said, "That makes a lot more sense." My supervisor still had me on janitorial shifts during all this, which made the whole thing surreal. I would spend half an hour clarifying access behavior with people in suits, then go replace paper towels in a restroom on 24. Part of me preferred it that way. It kept me steady. Kept me from thinking this was some movie where my life turned around because I had one good week. Then Jillian asked me to come to her office. This time I walked in through the front, not past the glass with a spray bottle in my hand. Her office looked different. Cleaner. Not calmer, exactly, but stripped of the extra people who used to orbit power. She closed the door, motioned for me to sit, and got right to it. The board approved removals this morning, she said. Dane is out. 2 others connected to him are under review. We're retaining the forensic team through recovery. I nodded once. That's good. It's necessary. She slid a thin folder across the desk. Inside was a formal role outline. Internal integrity and systems review. Cross-functional oversight. Independent escalation authority outside the normal reporting chain. A job built around finding patterns early, checking whether official explanations matched actual system behavior, and making sure nobody with a polished title could bury the truth again just because they sat closer to the board. I looked up at her. I'm not offering you charity, she said. And I'm not rewarding you for loyalty. I'm correcting a failure in how this company understands value. I didn't answer right away. My first reaction wasn't pride. It was fear. Because pushing a mop through quiet hallways had become simple. Not easy, but simple. Show up. Finish. Go home. Serious responsibility was different. Serious responsibility meant being visible again. It meant trusting the part of myself I had spent years putting in the ground. She saw all of that on my face. You were careful, she said. You didn't grandstand. You didn't overreach. You acted when it mattered and stayed inside the line. That judgment is rarer than expertise. I let out a breath and looked down at the folder again. Salary. Benefits. A number that would let me stop counting groceries in my head. A role that actually fit what I knew how to do. My son's with me every other weekend, I said, and immediately felt stupid for saying it. But she just nodded. Then take the kind of work that lets him see who you are. That line really hit me. Have you ever had to change your whole life just to be the person you want your kids to see? Tell me your story in the comments. That hit harder than I expected. I accepted 2 days later. Not because the fear vanished. It didn't. The first weeks were rough. Angry managers. Shaken staff. Clients needing reassurance. Systems full of blind spots we had ignored for too long because the org chart made people feel safer than the evidence did. But the company was still standing. Bruised, embarrassed, cut open in public, but alive. And I was there for the rebuild. Not as a hidden genius. Not as some miracle executive. Just a man who finally stopped pretending he had nothing left to contribute. Jillian saved Veil access by refusing to let polished lies become official truth. I found my way back by refusing to look away when the screens told the real story. In the end, that was the lesson both of us had to learn from opposite ends of the building. Titles don't protect a system.